Hi, everyone. Today we're going to look at Unit 3, Day 8, the Structured Historical Paragraph Tool. I know we looked at this before, but this is Part 3, specifically dealing with the social order under the Ming Dynasty. Now, you already did independent work where you categorized individual behavior, group behavior, and connection to Confucian belief. If you remember, if you watched the video, we modeled it through Jesuits in China, and then we worked with a different source, and you did the same thing. Then you actually categorized it under individual behavior, group behavior, connection to Confucian belief. Now, here's where it's going to get a little complicated. You need to use your annotations to construct a structured historical paragraph. In fact, there's something called a structured historical paragraph tool. And when you see it, this might be your reaction, which is like, yep, and get me out of here. Let's take a look for a second. What you're going to have to look at, and what you've been looking at and keep looking at and write about, is how did the Ming use social hierarchy as a source of power and control? So this actually describes to you what's on the next slide, which involves a topic sentence, historical context. You're going to introduce the evidence, bring the evidence, and then discuss it. So instead of looking confused, let's see what we can do to get rid of the confusion. Now, you're first going to look at the topic sentence. And I'm putting these purple boxes up here because I know that you can't type on here unless you have text boxes. So I'm just showing you that in order to alleviate or remove or lessen your confusion, that's why these purple boxes going on there. So even if your teacher gave you that PDF, this is the same thing. That's why I'm pointing it out, although it's probably not lined up straight. Now, how should you take it apart? Meaning, how should you not be so scared of what you need to do for this or this, depending on how you look at it? And the answer is you're going to keep thinking about how did the Ming Dynasty use social hierarchy as a source of power and control? So now you have to write the topic sentence, which is what will you say in this whole paragraph in one sentence? Meaning, how do you answer the question in one sentence? Next, you have to give the why. You see that first, the why over there? That thing? First, the why? Historical context. What was going on before the question? What's going on that the reader would need to know? What is going on as in before anything happened? Like, put us in place. The reader doesn't know anything. Or even if the reader does, the reader's assuming they don't know anything and they want to see what you do. Next step, that next over there, okay, it says introduce the evidence. You're going to start explaining the backstory. It says provide backstory about the source to your reader, meaning what was going on before that the reader needs to know. And finally, you're going to actually bring in your evidence. You're going to bring in your information from your source. You're going to bring in the facts that back up your topic sentence, and you're going to cite it. You see where it says, and I know everybody loves to forget that part, but don't forget it. Citations should be provided. I worked for grading regents many, many years. I even ran grading regents many years. And I could tell you that the graders, the first thing they do is they literally count citations. So you want to make sure those citations are there. Okay? That's going to help you to bring your evidence. And finally, you're going to analyze. You're going to have your discussion. You're going to explain why these facts back up the topic sentence. Meaning, if you're going to answer how the Ming Dynasty used social hierarchy as a source of power and control, you're going to have to say why. You're not going to say this is why, but you're going to explain why this is what it is. Now, speaking of how you're going to say it, so let's say you go back to the social class hierarchy. I guess we'll call it a diagram on how the hierarchy worked, or image, however you want to call it. Now, how do you say that? Like, what words should you use? Okay, so how are we going to say how the Ming Dynasty used social hierarchy as a source of power and control? So for the topic sentence, you're going to rephrase the language of the question to make a statement, right? You're going to say, for example, and listen carefully, the Ming Dynasty used social hierarchy as a source of power and control because, now I want you to think about that because, go back over here, think about it, okay? And your answer is going to be something along the lines of that when people were in higher classes, they had more money, they were richer, they had more power, or the lower classes had less power. Okay, but you're going to use that sentence starter for it's not so much sentence starter, but you're going to use that language of the language of the question. Ming used social hierarchy as a source of power and control because, and then you're going to say that in one sentence. Then you're going to give the background. You're going to talk about social hierarchy, explain that it's rooted in Chinese religion, it's rooted in Confucianism, and how there's certain expectations, and you're going to give that background. Then you would introduce your evidence. Remember this source that you marked up about group behavior, connections to Confucian belief, and individual behavior? That's when you would introduce the source. How are you going to introduce the source? Okay. Well, remember first we have at the time the source is written, you're talking about Confucian behavior. Next, to really understand the source, it's important to consider, or it's important to remember what was important in Chinese society during the Ming Dynasty. Okay. And you're going to say how social hierarchy was important, and you're going to explain why it's important. Then you're going to introduce your evidence. Okay, now your evidence again comes from this source. Now, let's go back here again. Let's just remind ourselves the title of the source here. Where's the title over here? Well, here's the nice clean source. Let's go with that. The title, it's called Jesuits in China by Matteo Ricci. Here it is. And you probably have your work on this from the other slides and the other sources, where you have what I showed you, the other slides and other source. Jesuits in China, Matteo Ricci. You see this language, guys? Don't write all those words. Write one. I'd probably write that Matteo Ricci asserts or puts forward that, let's just go back to see what we're saying. Matteo Ricci asserts, let's look at the source now. So you're going to write how Confucius, remember how you highlight in peak connection, Confucian belief is that they believe in self-mastery, that people should learn a lot. Use the language of what you wrote over here. Remember, you're speaking about the way Ricci said that Chinese society, because they are part of the social hierarchy and do everything, they're administered by the order of the learned. So that, remember what we wrote over here in the yellow, how group individual people have their country run by the order of the learned. You could use the language order of the learned. You probably want to put it in quotes, but don't quote the whole phrase. Use the idea from the phrase. Use what you put into these boxes on the side over here. Remember these things over here? Use that. Don't use the direct quotes, but cite. You cited Ricci at the end. If you didn't cite him at the beginning, like I showed you, you might want to do it at the end. Okay. Now, going back here, the last step. Okay. And this is where I think students get into the most trouble, but because you did all that work on this source, you won't get into trouble with it. This, the discussion, which means you connect the whole thing together. I would say you use the word assert. So you don't want to kind of repeat the same word. You could say this claim, instead of the author, this claim, or Ritchie's claim, or this claim of Ritchie, which sounds a little backwards, I would say. This claim by Ritchie is that Confucian belief was very important to the Ming Dynasty, and it demonstrates how social hierarchy was was used as a source of power and control, because the most educated people who were higher up in the social hierarchy, they were the ones who were running society. So I just modeled it for you for the first source. You're probably going to want to go to the second source, or the other source that you had earlier. Take a look at that. Okay, and break it down the same way. You can use the same sentence starters. You could use the same trick. You could do this every time your teacher asks you to create the structured paragraph tool with one piece of evidence. But just remember, don't get intimidated. You have the explanations, right, of what you need to do for each step. You have the sentence starters. You know how to annotate by color. You got this. I know you got this. How do I know you got this? Because you actually watched till the end of the video. That means you want to know something. Take your hand and pat yourself on the back. You got this.